I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare In the Trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm sitting here with Jeff Nathanson, who penned the screenplays for Rush Hour 2, Catch Me If You Can, and The Terminal. In 2004, he wrote and directed the film The Last Shot, and is currently working on Rush Hour 3. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You were an assistant to the producers on the 80s TV sitcom Perfect Strangers, is that true?
That's true. That was sort of my first real job in the entertainment business. And it was my job to bring in their lunches each day, as they like to nap during lunch. And so you had to go into their offices with lunch on a tray and get in and it was sort of like a military exercise, and get in there, put it down without waking them up. And
were these people of advanced age, or was it just the sheer creativity put them to sleep?
It was the sheer amount of money they had made on Perfect Strangers that lulled them into a deep sleep every day. And so I was terrible. I was never a good waiter. I couldn't do that. So I would drop the tray, and they hated me. But
they startled away.
They would wake up a lot, but I kept this job for a while. And
this is the Bronson P. Show, Mark Lynn Baker Show.
That's right.
What did you take away from this enlightening experience that may have helped you later in your career?
Well, I actually took a lot. It was the first time I was ever on a studio lot.
Okay.
So that was really exciting, to drive every day and wave at the guard, and I loved that. And just sort of walking around and being part of it, and knowing they were making the show. And I didn't get to go on the set much or see other people that much. I never got to even really meet the actors. But it was the first time that I ever kind of touched Hollywood, and so it was exciting.
Did you touch it in a naughty place?
I won't say that exactly.
Did you have any exposure to the show's writers?
Other than they would kind of order me to get them coffee and treat me like a PA, and so it wasn't pretty. But I got to talk to a couple of them and told them I want to be a writer, and they sort of looked at you and said, "Yeah, right, kid. Go get me a latte."
Now, were you also towel boy at Sports Club LA?
I was a towel boy. When I got out of college...
By the way, you instantly remind me of Michael Keaton's character in Night Shift at the end of the movie when he's giving out towels at the hedonism type
Yeah,
club.
That's sort of what it was. It's sort of every parent's dream to have your child go to, graduate from UCLA, and then they called to say, "Did you get a job?" And I said, "I'm going to be head towel boy at Sports Club LA." The funny thing was, there were so many celebrities that came in there
I can imagine.
all the time that you really kind of got a rare glimpse into Hollywood. And the first celebrity I ever met was, I was working the towel desk, and they said, "Tom Selleck needs a razor in the shower." And so
to even look like Tom Selleck coming out, probably. It's probably a Yeti going in or something.
Yeah. It had a little Yeti to it, I think. But I got to walk into the showers and hand him a razor, and I called my family, and they were very proud.
You really took a bullet for the team in terms of getting into the industry.
I did. I would do that.
Were you writing scripts or writing anything at this time?
I was writing like crazy, and I would work like a 10-hour shift and come home and write all night. And it was one of those kind of really pathetic. I was alone in an apartment in West LA, and just sort of, struggling, as they say.
Did you ever pass any material to the clients that you ran into at the sports club?
No, at that time I was like hoarding stuff. I would write scripts and then put them in drawers, and I'd write another one. I just wasn't giving stuff out for some reason.
And you were in the AFI screenwriting program?
Yeah, I had done that program for a year, and it was good, it was fine, but you sort of get to a point when you just want to make it, and you want to write and start trying to be a writer. And so...
Is that why you left, just because you were anxious to really get going?
Yeah, I didn't really want a master's degree in film. I wanted to be a screenwriter, so to stay would have been counterproductive to that.
Did anything helpful come out of that experience?
A lot. I think the thing that helped me most was they had incredible speakers come in. Spielberg, Kathy Kennedy, all these people would come in every week, and so I really only showed up for that.
Okay.
And got to hear, people that you really idolize talk. And it was always exciting years later when I got to meet or work with these people, to know that I'd sat there, as a student. That was kind of fun.
What were you expected to produce while you were there? What was the format of the program?
It was sort of like any screenwriting course. You basically were trying to produce a screenplay. The other part of AFI and any film school is they're all kind of director schools. So there's all these young directors running around who want to make films, and you're supposed to write a movie for them. So these guys want to get their short films made, and the idea is that there's producers, there's writers, and there's directors, and it's a mini studio, and you're trying to do it. But all the directors, just like in real life, and producers sort of control what happens, and the writers are the losers.
Even on
in film
on the
school.
academic level.
And so I would go to guys and say, I have this idea for a short. I had this idea about a guy who steals Sammy Davis Jr.'s glass eye. And this is this thing I wanted to do. And nobody wanted to do stuff like that. They wanted to do, a woman's dying of cancer, and they wanted to shoot these heavy drama things. So I was poisoned there. No one wanted to talk to me, and no one liked me very much. And so I didn't go. I didn't show up.
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question, which I think I may know the answer to. Would you recommend the experience to anyone?
Actually, I would, because especially if you want to be a screenwriter, the real key is to write. And film school, film classes, screenwriting classes, all they really do are force you to write. And they say, okay, you have 8 weeks to produce a screenplay, which you probably wouldn't produce in 8 years if somebody wasn't making you do it. And so I always really liked taking classes. Even if I didn't like the teacher or the student or whoever it was, I really just liked to be in the environment and forced to have a deadline. And it sort of trains you to deal with deadlines.
In your early period before things started to get produced, who were you working for, and what were the kind of things you were working on, and can you describe that experience a little bit before things really kicked into high gear?
Well, there was a long period of struggle. And are you talking about after I had sold a few things and was starting to work in Hollywood?
Were you working with Imagine before?
Yeah, my first job, I was bringing in the lunch to the guys, and I got a call saying that Charles Shire and Nancy Meyers had an idea for a movie, and they had read my spec script and that they wanted me to write it.
Oh, and now this is a spec script that ended up serving as a writing sample, mostly?
That's right. It was a straight writing sample.
Okay.
And they had read it and liked it, and on the phone they said, "You're hired." And I walked in and I woke the guy up. I can remember waking. I said, "We have to wake up." He said, "It was my lunch." I said, "No, I'm quitting today." And I got the job with Imagine and started writing. And a week later, I went into Ivan Reitman's company and pitched them something, and they bought it. And a week later, I went into Castle Rock and pitched them something. And it was sort of like they let me in the club. Like somebody bought something, and then everybody wanted to buy stuff. So I very quickly was working.
So it went from literally famine to feast.
It was very kind of hard to deal with, because I was suddenly meeting with and dealing with a lot of people, and Rob Reiner and people that at the time I was just completely in awe of, and they were doing great stuff, and it was a really exciting time. And your question, which was, what was it like to have none of those things get made? It was sort of. It wasn't too bad because I didn't really understand it. At the time, I just thought, well, you write stuff and then they put it on a shelf. Isn't that how Hollywood works? I didn't know that there's another step where they actually make the movie.
Right. What were the types of projects that you were working on? Did they have a similar
They were all comedies. They were all high-concept comedies at that time. The writing samples, though, remain very quirky character stuff.
More reflective of your sensibility?
Exactly. But then nobody makes those movies, so the stuff I would sell or I get hired to do was all pretty much high-concept comedy.
Could you bring a little bit of your kind of sensibility into those, or was it hard to marry the two?
I would try to, and I've never been great at writing high-concept comedy, as I proved in that time, and I was much better suited to character stuff.
Right.
But I really looked at that time as kind of the best time for me, because it was just pure excitement. Every day was driving on a different lot or a different phone call or a different meeting, and I loved it.
Why do you think none of those scripts ended up getting made or getting produced? What were the obstacles?
As always, it's a combination of many things. Part of it might have been my sensibilities, not meshing with high concept stuff. It's very difficult, as you know, to get things made, period. Especially when you're young and you're just starting out. And
most movies don't get made anywhere, period, by anybody.
Yeah, even now it's hard to get movies made. It's just not an easy thing to do. And so I went into it very blind, like, oh, you're going to write this stuff and they'll make the movie. And it's just not the way it works. Right. So it was a big learning curve for me. And sort of what happened was the original spec did get made. And I thought, okay, now I've broken through, and Castle Rock made the movie, and it was a movie called Stranger Things that they came to me one day and they said, we want to make the movie, and Jason Alexander from Seinfeld fame at that time was the hottest show, is going to star in and direct, because Castle Rock produced that show. So we were in production and up and running, and I thought, well, this is it. You go from not having things made, you get something made, and then it's smooth sailing. And that movie is, I think, only the first film ever made not even to go to video. It has that distinction.
Right. It's on PSP right now.
Exactly.
How do you maintain faith during a period like that, where you're writing, but not a lot's hitting the screen? Were you just happy that you were writing, and so you weren't? It wasn't too depressing that stuff wasn't getting made.
It's depressing.
Right. Okay.
But you a few years before, a year before, you were handing razors to Tom Selleck in the shower.
Right. So you kept perspective.
So you always remember, well, I'm working as a writer, I'm getting paid, I can pay my bills, I can eat in restaurants again.
Right.
It's not that depressing. I'm very driven and competitive, so it was driving me a little crazy, but I knew that if I just kept writing and sort of got back to what I do, that eventually it would be okay.
Were you writing additional specs on the side?
I'm always, even now, I'm always writing my own stuff. I mean, I just sort of believe in that, to never just let that go.
And do you prefer that to pitching blindly, or do you like coming with spec scripts?
No, I do it. I mean, I like to work. I like to have other ideas. I like to get hired for things. But I always like to have on the side, almost like a mistress, my own spec, my own thing. Even if I don't send it out, even if no one ever sees it, I just am always writing those.
Is that almost therapeutic?
It does. It's a thing that sort of reminds you, okay, in worst case scenario, the world ends today, I can sit down and still write my own stuff.
You had mentioned you had written a lot of specs before the first one that got produced. How many do you say you had to kind of get through? And did you submit those around town? Have people seen them and you just hadn't struck gold with any of them?
Well, I started young. I mean, I started at 18 years old at UC Santa Barbara, where I first went to school. So I kind of knew, I opened up the school catalog and it said screenwriter.
Right.
They had a class. And there was a great screenwriting teacher there that was just dumb luck that eventually was Scott Frank's teacher and a lot of other, I mean, he was before me, but there's a ton of people that went through this guy's class. Right. And I took that guy's class and said, I'm going to be a screenwriter. I know that's what I want to do. And so I started writing scripts. But I also was leery about showing people stuff, and this is just something I've always had in my head. So there are quite a few scripts. As a professional writer, there's less, because a lot of those end up selling or stuff. But when I was young, there's probably 5 or 6 that no one has really seen. And
did going through those or getting through the process of writing those help you in the end in terms of your developing a skill set or advancing your own talent?
There's a tremendous amount of people who say, I want to be a screenwriter.
Right.
And who think they write a script and that makes them a screenwriter. And I think it's like anything. It's, you're not a black belt after a year of karate. It takes time, and I think that for me, it was lucky that I started so young and I wrote all these scripts, because each one, I learned that if you go down that road, or if you start with an idea that's really not fully developed, or this character's unlikable and now my whole script's unlikable. You learn all these lessons.
Right.
And so I had all these great sort of experiences, even though the scripts were put in drawers.
Right.
And it didn't deter me, and people thought I was a little nutty that I was writing all these scripts, but I've always been able to do that, is to write 100 pages is not a big deal to me. Right. So. Did
you find that the class helped you in terms of just learning the nuts and bolts of structure and how to pace out a story?
It helps you. They show you how it looks on the page.
Right.
They teach you all the things. This particular class was helpful for a lot of reasons, because this teacher, Paul Lazarus, had been in Hollywood, had been an executive.
Okay.
So he told a lot of stories, and it was just, for me, when you're in Santa Barbara and you've never met anyone from Hollywood, it was just fascinating.
Right. What was the most peculiar or most memorable story he told you?
Well, the most memorable thing was he gave a lot of great advice, first of all. And
would you call this person a mentor?
He was my mentor,
okay.
Yeah. He was the one that said to me, when you go to Hollywood and you go off, have a calling card. Have one script that you read through and you say, I really like this and I'm happy. And so I really took that to heart, and I just waited, and I waited, and I waited. And so that spec script that eventually got me all that work was that calling card.
Was that the Jason Alexander movie?
Yeah, Stranger Things. Mm-hmm. And this was just a very small, quirky little comedy, but it was original, and it had original characters, and it was my voice exactly. So I'm so glad that I waited, and that I didn't send out all those other ones, because your instinct is to write a script and hand it to someone. That's what people want to do.
Right.
Or they want to have a reading. How many people call you and say, I want to have a reading of my script. Well, why?
Yeah. Well, I always feel bad at those things because they also call their actor friends, and there's always hope that the actor will get cast eventually in the part, and they never do.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever calls the poor actors back and say, "Hey,
Exactly.
we're making the movie. Let's go."
So the reality was, Paul Lazarus was my mentor. He gave me great advice, and his son had produced a movie called Capricorn One, which was this great
the Peter Hyams movie.
Great movie from the 70s that I loved. And so I could go in Paul Lazarus' office, and he had the script for Capricorn 1, so I could touch that script. And it was like these little tiny steps toward Hollywood where you're feeling that this was in Hollywood, this was made in a movie, and you're like, oh, so this is possible.
Right. Well, that must have been great. So you knew the film, you were a fan of it, and then you get to see literally
Yeah, and
the
I got to
screenplay
meet
for
his
it.
son, who was the
Right.
producer of that movie, and ask all the questions. So it was, that's what it is. It's sort of like, oh, you're making these baby steps toward getting there. And, there are people that have it happen overnight. They write a script. They make the movie, it's a big hit. Mine was such a slow kind of process.
And did you read the script? Did you actually sit down and read the script? Did you glean anything or kind of infer anything process-wise?
Oh yeah, because it's different. Then you realize, wait, the script's different than the movie. So how can that be?
Well, now if I ever have to play 6 Degrees of Jeff Nathanson to get to O.J. Simpson, you've now told me how I can get there.
Exactly.
So
Well, there's one other way that we can't say in film.
What did you do to the original Rush Hour that got it a green light?
Well, I think that the original Rush Hour was a great, brilliant casting of two people. And I love Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, so I read the script knowing they were involved in the movie. So I had a big advantage. And I think, just did what I took what was missing. And this is a lot of times what you do when you come in to rewrite a movie is you look and see what's not there. And what wasn't there was sort of the heart and the soul and and ultimately the comedy. Right. Those three things. It was a straight action movie starring Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. Right. And Jackie Chan was only known for these action movies, and Chris Tucker was, I think they just thought would come in and ad lib, but it wasn't. Yeah. It was not yet on paper. Right. So I added a lot of heart and a lot of soul and a lot of humor. And that really resulted in, people fell in love with those two characters mainly because of what you added. They became a beloved team. Yeah, I think that it's halfway. I think their chemistry, even if they were just sitting here talking, they would have a certain amount of chemistry together. Right. But you wouldn't understand either of them, but but chemistry, yes. And I just helped them, I think, to sort of. Sometimes you can put chemistry on the page. Oh, that's interesting. So do you do that mostly through the dialogue in a screenplay, or does it bleed into direction as well? I think you have to give people a reason to have chemistry. You have to give the actors an actual reason to connect, and you can't just assume that you get the right two guys in a room and it's going to be perfect. So you have to help them. In terms of taking away a lesson from Rush Hour 1, is that what you learned, on that job the most, that you have to put chemistry on the page? I think that, and you have to trust your gut, that if a project comes along, and even if people are saying don't do it, or why would you do that, or that movie, who's going to go see that, or it's basically a straight-to-video movie, which are all the things I was hearing, because no one really saw either of them as American movie stars. Yeah. That you sort of have to say to yourself, well, I like both those guys, and I don't care what anyone says, and I think that could be a funny movie, and so you have to sort of, at some point, go with what your instincts are. Right. Now, on Catch Me If You Can, you were adapting or writing based on Frank Abagnale. Help me out, Abagnale? Abagnale. Frank Abagnale Jr.'s autobiography. Did you bring that project to DreamWorks, or what's the genesis of how that came about? A good friend of mine who originally got me my first job ever at Imagine had the rights to the book. And she sent me just an audio tape of Frank talking about his life. He loves to talk about his life. Right. And he goes around the world talking about his life. He's really good at it. So I was just driving my car one day and I heard this audio tape of Frank and I loved his story. Hadn't even read the book. And I took it to DreamWorks where I had worked quite a bit. And what were you working at DreamWorks on? I had worked on Twister with them, and I had worked on Little Giants and a bunch of other stuff. So I kind of knew them and they knew me. And I went to 3 or 4 places that all rejected it, and DreamWorks sort of said, okay, we'll take a shot at this. What was your pitch like that got everyone hooked? I'm terrible at pitching. There's guys that are really good, and this is about as excited as I get. I just am not an emotional person. So I dread pitching, and I really I drive to the meetings just almost in tears. And Catch Me was no different. It was a terrible pitch. I sort of just said, Great Pretender and, Con Man movie and The Sting, and I was just sort of saying anything that could sort of trigger something in them.
Did you bring anything with you, like a little treatment or cards or anything?
Nothing. I just sort of had the book, and I said, just listen to the audio of this guy. And no one ever did. No one ever does anything you tell them to do.
Right.
So I just I think they just went on some faith, and it was such a little nothing thing at the time. You got to remember, this is nothing to them. I'm cheap at the time.
Right. Way before DiCaprio, way before Steven.
Way before everybody. So for them, they just took a shot.
How did you approach adapting the book? I mean, did you outline and did you write in the margins of the book? Like,
everyone did that.
Right.
Unfortunately, that book doesn't translate into a movie that well. It's just an episodic account of, okay, here's what I did when I was a doctor. Here's what I did when I was a lawyer. That was pretty much it. And so I kind of went back to the source and said, Frank, I need to sit down with you and start over as if I was going to write the book. And we had many, many interviews, and I just started talking and tried to get something that wasn't in the book, which was sort of, again, it goes back to the soul of the piece. What was it? Why did he do it? Why did he go? Why did he run away? All these questions that aren't answered.
Did you feel that was missing in the autobiography?
I felt like it was missing, and I felt like you can't write the movie, you can't write about this guy's life until you sort of answer these questions. And he was very reluctant at first to talk about his life, as most people are, to really open up, because it becomes a therapy session at that point. You're asking someone to tell you their secrets. Mm-hmm. And it's just about building people's trust. And after a while, he did open up and told me all about his family and his father and his mother and what really happened. And I didn't even take half of what happened, but it was enough for me to say, okay, I understand what this movie can be.
So from that, you started to get an idea of the heart, what became the heart of the movie, I imagine, which is the father story. And did you add a lot in terms of the Tom Hanks character and the relationship between him?
Yeah, that was the second half of it, which was, so I had half of it. I had the soul, I had the character, but I still didn't have the movie. And it's one of those things where you suddenly realize over time, well, there's this whole other thing missing, and that is the transfer of, from Frank Abagnale from one father to another father, and that's what happens in the movie is that Tom Hanks becomes the surrogate father,
yes.
And that's just something that you find in a rewrite one day, and you say, oh, I understand the movie now, mm-hmm. And once that happens, then suddenly Leonardo DiCaprio is attached, and Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and now you have a movie.
Everything falls into place. Were there discussions about how closely to adhere to the real life facts or the book, and were there big debates about what to leave or what to invent, or were you all uniform in kind of the way you were going to approach it, you in the studio or Frank or whomever?
I was fortunate that this is not a murder story or a political story,
right?
And that's where the media usually comes in and really attacks things for truth. But I remember about 3 days before the movie came out, Steven called me and said, I have a question for you that really I should have asked a while ago. Did any of this happen? I said, I have no idea, Steven. I mean, we're talking to one of the great con men of all time who's telling us his life story. I said, the only thing I know for sure is that he was in prison at this time, because I called the prison, but the rest of it, I said, Steven, I don't know.
I imagine it's if you're adapting a con man's life, you can't ask that question like, did this really happen? Who knows what the guy's telling?
Exactly.
He seems like a showman and is trying to tell the best story possible.
And I think that ultimately what I decided was it didn't matter for me. What mattered was emotionally, did this happen? Is this the emotional journey that Frank took? Was he a kid who ran away and sort of eventually, pulled all these cons and got a job with the FBI and became one of the foremost experts on cons now? I mean, did that happen emotionally, and does that journey capture in the film? The day-to-day, the things, the father, the FBI, all that stuff is really created.
Were there many revisions from your initial first draft to the shooting script?
It was a 3-year process.
3 years, wow. Yeah. Don't take 3 years, but walk us through how did that process work? What took 3 years?
Well, again, like I talked about, discovering the story.
Okay.
There was also a period where the studio lost interest and it just was put on a shelf. There was a period where it came back into life a little bit.
Is that because Steven Spielberg wasn't always the director?
He came in very late.
Okay.
I mean, he came in after Leonardo DiCaprio.
Did other directors work with you to develop it?
No, there were, once down the road when the script was further along, a lot of directors came and went. There was almost, probably 10 or 12 guys that really, I was excited, and they were all great guys. So it was, that period was fine. I knew the movie was getting made and all that. It was the early part where, people were not sure what it was. It was a very small, quirky movie about a guy running around pretending to be these things. It wasn't this big thing that it became.
Do you feel like with heavyweights really, like Steven Spielberg directing and Leonardo DiCaprio starring, did it make the story bigger just by virtue of their attachment? And did that influence your writing during production at all?
You definitely start, once you get a call saying Tom Hanks is going to play this guy, you can definitely write toward that. I had always pictured Leonardo DiCaprio from the beginning, mainly because at the time there weren't many young actors, and especially not a lot of young movie stars.
Right. And who could take a role from a 16-year-old up through a 30-year-old?
And he's the best young actor we have. So it was impossible to start even in the beginning and not write that toward Leo.